Hello and welcome back. In this section I'll show you what makes German special. You will learn important aspects of German grammar and you will get a better understanding of how German works. I've tried to make the grammar explanations as user-friendly as possible and to present them in relatively small chunks. As I mentioned before, please feel free to watch the videos several times until you feel familiar with all the content. Don't forget that even when you understand what you hear and see, it will take some practice before you can actively produce the content. So I encourage you to keep doing the exercises in order to test your knowledge and develop your skills further. And now let's dive right into the first lesson. In this lesson, I'll show you a little trick that will help you sound more like a native German speaker. Whenever the situation allows, use I was in rather than I went to. It's not a mistake to say I went to, but it's a translation from English and German native speakers would prefer the simpler I was in. Let's have a look at an example. Yesterday we went to an Italian restaurant. If you translate this sentence word for word, you'll get Gestern sind wir in ein italienisches Restaurant gegangen. Which is okay, sounds a little bit complex to me. No grammar mistakes here, but I would say it like this. Wir waren gestern in einem italienischen Restaurant. And this means we were yesterday in an Italian restaurant. You will also notice that I placed the gestern, yesterday, after the verb in the middle of the sentence, rather than at the beginning as you do in English. Again, it wouldn't be wrong to start the sentence with gestern, but it kind of puts a stress on that particular word, and sticking to the Tecamolo word order that you know from one of the previous lessons in the course is usually the preferred way of wording this. Here is another example. This morning I went to the supermarket. The word-for-word translation is Diesen Morgen bin ich zum Supermarkt gegangen. Now, as opposed to the previous word-for-word translation, this one is wrong. I'll explain why in a moment. The correct translation is Ich war heute Morgen im Supermarkt. I was today morning in the supermarket. Sounds funny in English, but that's how we say it in German. The mistake I just mentioned is the following. This morning does not translate to dieser Morgen, but heute Morgen, today morning. This afternoon is heute Nachmittag, today afternoon, and tonight is heute Abend, today evening. You don't say heute Nacht, today night, because in German the definition of evening is anything between 7 p.m. and midnight, and night is from midnight to the morning. Alright, that's the little trick I wanted to show you. It's just a small modification in the choice of words, but I think it's a simpler wording and it makes a big difference. The Germans are probably one of the most stereotyped nationalities in the world, and while it is good to challenge those stereotypes, it's also interesting to see where they might come from. In this lesson, I'd like to talk about some reasons why Germans might come across as rude, and I will also show you how to correctly use the verbs have to and need to in German. First of all, German communication is very direct. Let's take the following example. Excuse me, do you know what time it is? Now, if you ask a German this question, I can really imagine some people who would answer, yes, I do, and keep walking. In German, I'd probably ask, Entschuldigung, wie spät ist es? Excuse me, what time is it? So I don't ask if they know what time it is, but I ask for that specific piece of information. Another example. At the supermarket, you don't find the bread and you ask, excuse me, do you have bread? And again, a grumpy shop assistant might answer, yes, we do. and continue with what they were doing. A direct, more efficient way of asking would be, Entschuldigung, wo ist das Brot? Excuse me, where is the bread? And then the shop assistant will point you to the right direction. There is no doubt that the English language is less direct in those situations, and therefore perceived as more polite than German. This is also part of the principle, straight to the point please. In general, you can say Germans don't like to waste time, and especially when it comes to communication. In English, the following sentence is pretty normal. Excuse me, I'm wondering if you could tell me where the nearest subway station is. In German, I would approach a person and simply say, Entschuldigung, wo ist die nächste U-Bahn? Excuse me, where is the closest subway? Straight to the point, and that's perfectly fine. Now, it's important to know that Germans usually say what they mean. And if they don't mean it, they won't say or ask it. For example, how are you? You must come visit me. Take care. Have a nice day. These are all, when you strip them down, ways of saying hello or goodbye in English. When an English speaker greets someone with how are you, they don't actually want to know how that person is, nor do they expect an answer. They're just saying hello. The Germans, on the other hand, tend to leave out sentences like these, as they seem a waste of time. At the supermarket checkout, for example, you probably won't hear schönen Tag noch, have a nice day, but rather auf Wiedersehen, goodbye. Now, this would come across as rude to an English speaker, but it's not. These kinds of sentences just aren't very common in the German language, because the Germans don't believe they add anything to a conversation. Alright. Another reason why German can sound rude to English speakers is the use of the verb müssen, must. The English verbs have to and need to both translate to the German müssen. You do not say haben zu or brauchen zu. That's a word-for-word translation that does not work in this case. At a local authority office, you might hear this sentence. Sie müssen dieses Formular ausfüllen. You need to fill in this form. Or, as we actually say, you must fill in this form. To some people this sounds very direct and bossy, but that's not the intention. Let's have a closer look at the conjugation of the verb müssen, and I'll be using example sentences to provide some context. Ich muss meine Hausaufgaben machen. I have to do my homework. Du musst hier links abbiegen. You have to turn left here. Er muss eine neue Waschmaschine kaufen. He has to buy a new washing machine. Wir müssen nach München fahren. We have to drive to Munich. Ihr müsst den Film unbedingt sehen. You guys absolutely have to see the film. Sie müssen jetzt nach Hause gehen. They have to go home now. Okay, so I hope in this lesson I've shown how the differences between English and German languages can lead people to believe that Germans are rude and cold, and why this is often not the case. It's just a different way of communicating. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson. Hello and welcome back. This is going to be a very interesting lesson. It kind of reminds me of the lesson we had on false friends earlier in this course. However, this time I won't be talking about words that exist in both languages and have a different meaning, but I'll show you how German took words from English and gave them a whole new meaning. Let's start with a very famous one. Das Handy. Ich habe gestern ein neues Handy gekauft. Now, if you translate this sentence and keep the English word, handy, you will get, yesterday I bought a new handy. But the real meaning is cell phone or mobile phone. Yesterday I bought a new cell phone. It might be handy and yes, operated with a pair of hands, but of course in English you cannot use this word when you talk about a cell phone. Okay, here's the next one. Das Public Viewing. Das größte Public Viewing Event ist in Frankfurt. Some Germans think, well, this is English, so I can say, the biggest public viewing event is in Frankfurt. But an English speaker will probably understand something totally different, because in German, public viewing means public screening or public broadcast. It's when hundreds or thousands of people come together in a public place in order to watch a soccer match or another sports event screened onto a big screen. It happens a lot during the Football World Cup, by the way. Alright, the next one is der Partnerlook. Sie waren im Partnerlook auf der Party. They went in partnerlook to the party. Can you guess what this means? It's dressing the same as your significant other, matching clothes. Look alike or dressed like twins. So in our example, they went to the party dressed like twins. Der Partnerlook. The next English word that got a different meaning in German is das Mobbing. Mobbing am Arbeitsplatz nimmt in Deutschland zu. One might be tempted to translate this as mobbing at the workplace is increasing in Germany, but that doesn't really work. The correct translation of mobbing is bullying. In this context, workplace bullying. So the headline reads, Workplace bullying is increasing in Germany. And we'll move straight on to the next one. Der Beamer. Ich brauche einen Beamer für meine Präsentation. I need a beamer for my presentation. And I've actually heard Germans saying that when they were talking English. Now, they don't need a nice BMW car for their presentation, but a projector. Ich brauche einen Beamer means I need a projector, the device that is used to display videos or images onto a screen. The next one is also interesting. Der Smoking. Soll ich einen Smoking oder einen Anzug tragen? Should I wear a smoking or a suit? What do you think? Well, this is probably a throwback to when men would retire to smoke cigars after a fancy dinner, and the correct translation for smoking is tuxedo. So when you're invited to a formal event and you're debating whether to wear a tuxedo or a suit, in German you would use the word smoking for tuxedo. Alright, next. Die Wellness. Das neue Wellness-Hotel eröffnet im Winter. The new wellness hotel opens in winter. This is a widely used term in German, and as you can see, it became a noun, die Wellness. And the meaning is spa. Some say that German simply created a combination of the words well-being and fitness. Wellness. Now, while wellness is a word used in the English-speaking world, there are a lot of terms that are used instead when talking about what we call wellness in German. In English, you would probably say, depending on the context, health resort or well-being, spa, etc. And last but not least, der Oldtimer. Heute beginnt die jährliche Oldtimer-Versammlung. Today begins the annual Oldtimer Gathering. I especially like this one. It is not an event where many senior citizens come together, but when a German says oldtimer, he refers to a vintage car or a classic car. So in my example sentence, I'm saying that today begins the annual vintage car gathering. Alright, those were some English words that get a whole new meaning in German. You will probably also have to use these words in some situations, although it might sound silly to you. But now you are well prepared. I mentioned before that German is a very accurate language. Sometimes it uses different words for situations in which English would use the same word. The use of when is such a situation. In German, there are 3 words for the English when: wenn, wann, and als. And I actually hear a lot of mistakes when students try to form sentences with when in German. So let's clear up the confusion and make the differences easy to understand. We'll start with wann. Wann is used in questions and indirect questions. And it can be replaced with at what time. So if you're asking a question with when, you have to use wann. Let's check out an example. A direct question starts with wann. Wann kommst du nach Deutschland? When do you come to Germany? Wann öffnet die Bank? When does the bank open? And in both cases, you can replace when with at what time. Alright, and here are some indirect questions. Ich weiß nicht, wann nach Deutschland kommt. I don't know when he comes to Germany. Hat nicht gesagt, wann die Bank öffnet. He didn't say when the bank opens. You see that indirect questions are actually statements that usually start with a short introduction and then when. I don't know when. He didn't say when, etc. And again, you can replace when with at what time. Okay, next is als. Als is used for single events or periods of time in the past. Ich war unter der Dusche, als du angerufen hast. I was in the shower when you called. And the fun fact is that in German we actually say I was under the shower, not in the shower. Ich war unter der Dusche, als du angerufen hast. Ist eingeschlafen, als der Film angefangen hat. He fell asleep when the film started. And here are some examples for periods in the past. Als sie ein Kind war, wollte sie Ärztin werden. When she was a child, she wanted to become a doctor. Als wir in München gewohnt haben, haben wir jedes Wochenende in den Alpen verbracht. When we lived in Munich, we spent every weekend in the Alps. That's a long sentence, so I'll repeat it. Als wir in München gewohnt haben, haben wir jedes Wochenende in den Alpen verbracht. You see that all the examples here happen in the past, and that's why you use als for when. Okay, and finally, wenn. Wenn is used for events in the present and the future, as well as for repeated events in the past. Let's start with present and future events. Wenn ich Hunger habe, esse ich einen Sandwich. When I'm hungry, I eat a sandwich. This is a statement and I use the present tense, so it has to be wenn. Ruf mich an, wenn du aus dem Urlaub zurück bist. Call me when you're back from vacation. This will happen in the future, once the person is back from their vacation, so again we use wenn. Now, repeated events in the past usually start with always when or every time when, and that's how they can be identified. Immer wenn wir in London waren, hat es geregnet. Always when we were in London, it was raining. This is not a one-time event in the past that would require the use of als, but it's something that happened several times, and that's why we say wenn. Jedes Mal, wenn ich dich angerufen habe, war besetzt. Every time when I called you, the line was busy. And here again, the trigger for wenn is every time. This is something that happens repeatedly. Alright, I'm aware of the fact that all these different uses can be confusing, so I'll try to summarize in the clearest way possible. You use als when you talk about an event in the past. When you talk about an event in the present or the future. And wann when you ask a question. If you learn these 3 rules and apply them when you speak German, it will definitely make a big difference and you will avoid making one of the most common mistakes. In this lesson, I'd like to talk about the difference between zu Hause and nach Hause. The reason so many students get them wrong is that they're very similar and that they both use words that usually express the idea of heading in a direction and going to a destination, zu and nach. Do you want to go to another city or to one of your friends? In English you use to, to. In German, however, there are at least half a dozen ways to say to. Let's check out the most important ones before we talk more in detail about zu Hause and nach Hause. First of all, nach. You use it for cities, countries, and continents. It's the most common one. Ich fahre nach Berlin. I'm going to Berlin. Ich fahre nach Frankreich. I'm going to France. So these are examples for a city and a country. The next one is in. In German, there aren't many countries that have an article, but when they do have one, like Switzerland, die Schweiz, the United States, die USA, or Turkey, die Türkei, and you'd like to say that you're going there, you need to use in and the article in the accusative form. Ich fahre in die Schweiz. I'm going to Switzerland. Ich fahre in die USA. I'm going to the United States. Alright, the third one I'd like to show you is zu. You use it with people. Ich fahre zu Martina. I'm going to see Martina. Literally we say I go to Martina. Ich fahre zu meinem Freund. I'm going to my friend's place. And again, the word-for-word translation is I go to my friend. So we just saw that nach and zu are prepositions that are used to convey the idea of movement toward a specific destination. That's why it's not surprising that the idiomatic phrases nach Hause and zu Hause cause confusion. Both are exceptions to the rule. Let's start with nach Hause. Nach Hause means moving in a direction toward home, as in ich gehe nach Hause, I'm going home. The exception here is that we use nach, although it's not a city, country or continent, but the idea of movement exists. Sie arbeitet bis 17 Uhr und dann fährt sie nach Hause. She works until 5 p.m. and then she goes home. Wir kommen nie vor 1 Uhr nach Hause. We never get home before 1 a.m. Or as we say in German, we never come home before 1 a.m. And now I'll show you some examples with zu Hause. Zu Hause means at home. The exception here is that we use zu, although no movement is involved. You are already at home. Ich bin zu Hause. I'm at home. Du kannst heute Abend kommen. Ich bin ab 8 zu Hause. You can come tonight. I'll be at home from 8 p.m. Er war nicht zu Hause, als der Nachbar an der Tür geklingelt hat. He was not at home when the neighbor rang at the door. As you can see, idiomatic expressions don't always follow the rules, and breaking them down into their individual parts often doesn't help one's understanding. I recommend learning them as fixed expressions in a meaningful context, and that's the best way to avoid confusion. In this lesson, I'd like to talk about a question that has driven many German learners crazy. Is it der, die, or das? English is a language without grammatical gender, so the definite article is always the. In German, however, we have three grammatical genders: masculine, feminine, and neuter. And it's important to remember the gender of the nouns, because it determines the article you're going to use. So let's start with a quick look at the definite articles in German. The masculine definite article is der. For example, der Mann, the man. Of all the nouns in the German language, 43% are masculine. The feminine definite article is die, as in die Frau, the woman. Of all the nouns in German, 38% are feminine. And the neuter definite article is das. For example, das Kind, the child. 19% of all German nouns are neuter. So you can see, if in doubt about the gender of a noun, the best guess is der, because percentage-wise there are more masculine than feminine or neuter nouns. But, of course, it's better to know than to guess, and that's why I'll show you some useful tips on how to remember the grammatical gender of German nouns. The first one is: learn nouns with their genders. Treat the article of a noun as a part of the word. Don't just learn Hund, dog, but der Hund, the dog. Like that, you can memorize them together, making it easier to remember. And it's even better to learn a whole sentence. Ich habe einen braunen Hund. I have a brown dog. Our brain doesn't really like disconnected pieces of information. A meaningful context makes it much easier to remember. And there are additional benefits. In this sentence, for example, you also learn and practice the accusative form of the indefinite article einen. Now, in addition, you learn a sentence that is relevant to you, and you know that it's correct. So, in a conversation, if you'd like to say that you have a brown dog, you can use this sentence with confidence because you know it's correct. And this will make your German more fluent. Okay, the second tip is: use a color code system as visual help. I always say that when you learn a new word, it's best to use as many senses as possible. Don't just read the word, but also pronounce it, write it, and hear it. The more senses you use, the better your brain will retain the information. And if you use a color code system, it will make it even easier for your brain to memorize the gender. Now, how do we do that? When you learn a new word, write it down with a blue pen if it's masculine, like der Mann, the man. Use a red pen for feminine nouns, like die Frau, the woman. And a yellow pen for neuter nouns, like das Kind, the child. This color association helps later on to recall the gender by just trying to remember what color the word was written in. I recently came across a website called genusly.com. It tells you the grammatical gender of a German noun as you type it in a text box on their homepage. This is how it looks like. You see that it colors masculine nouns in blue, feminine nouns in red, and neuter nouns in yellow. The benefit is that it saves you time because it doesn't interrupt your cognitive flow. You don't have to look up words you're not sure about the gender. The website tells you immediately after writing the word. And as we just learned, the color visualization helps you learn and memorize the German gender classification more easily. Check it out, it's a really helpful tool. And by the way, an interesting variation of this technique is having colored sheets of paper, where each color stands for a particular gender. So you could have blue paper, and when you learn a new masculine noun, you write it there, red paper for feminine, and yellow for neuter nouns. Alright, this has been part 1 of the lesson how to learn German noun gender. I'll see you guys again in part 2. Hello and welcome back. This is part 2 of the lesson how to learn German noun gender. My next tip is use a mnemonic memory technique. I'm a big fan of this kind of techniques, and it really works when it comes to memorizing things. A couple of years ago, I read a book about mnemonics, and the goal of one of the exercises was to remember all 50 American states in their alphabetical order. I was skeptical, but went ahead, and 2 hours later I was indeed able to recite all 50 states from Alabama to Wyoming from memory. Now, how does this work? The three main principles are association, imagination, and location. What you do is, you use your mind to create links and associations that will help you remember information. German has 3 noun genders, so you can choose, for example, a male person and associate masculine objects with this person, a female person and associate feminine objects with this person, and a neutral place to be associated with neuter objects. Now you create a story. I chose my father to be the male person, my mother to be the female person, and my house to be the neutral place. Let's start. Mein Vater geht mit dem Hund in den Park. My father goes with the dog to the park. Er sitzt unter einem Baum und sieht einen See mit Fischen. He sits under a tree and sees a lake with fish. You can see that all the nouns in this story are masculine, and they are associated with my father. When you imagine and visualize this story, your brain will make the connection and later on remember the correct noun gender more easily. Okay, let's create another story. Meine Mutter geht in die Stadt. My mother goes to the city. Sie hat eine Blume in der einen Hand und eine Tasche in der anderen. She has a flower in one hand and a bag in the other. All the nouns are feminine. And again, imagine the situation with colors and motions. The more interesting, strange, or funny it is, the easier you will remember it. And our last story will take place in my house. Im Haus sind viele Kinder. In the house there are many children. Sie sind in einem großen Zimmer mit vielen Fenstern und essen Eis. They are in a big room with many windows and eat ice cream. So this is a story that is associated with my neutral place and features only neuter nouns. That's how the technique works. It activates your vision and imagination, and it puts things into context, which is tremendously helpful. You have the people do stuff and put things in the house, and then you watch that in your head like a movie. The possibilities are endless. Now, I'd like to encourage you to create your own association scenarios, because every mind is different, and your own associations are much better as they reflect the way in which your mind works. At first it might be difficult, but with a little practice you will soon become very familiar with this technique and start having fun creating and developing these stories. Alright, the next tip is identify the noun gender by word endings. I won't go into too much detail about this method. Basically, how it works is you look at the word ending of a noun, the so-called suffix, and for example, if it ends with ling, there is a good chance that it's masculine. If it ends with ung, it's probably feminine, and so on. The problem is that there are many exceptions, and I find it easier to just learn the article together with the noun, or use the association technique I mentioned before. But it does work for some, and that's why I wanted to include it here. I've added a document with more information about this method to the resources section, so if you're interested, please feel free to have a look. And those were my tips on how to learn German noun gender. To summarize, here they are again. Learn nouns with their genders. Use a color code system as visual help. Use a mnemonic memory technique. And identify the noun gender by word endings. Thanks for watching, and I see you in the next lesson. Hey and welcome to another video in the course How to Avoid Common Mistakes. Today I'd like to talk about the difference between the German words aber and sondern. Both mean but in English, but there is an important difference. Aber is used after a positive clause, and sondern is only used after a negative clause. What does that mean? Let's have a look at some examples to make it clearer. Möchte Deutsch lernen, aber hat keine Zeit. He would like to learn German, but he doesn't have time. Möchte Deutsch lernen, aber hat keine Zeit. You see that the first part of the sentence before the comma is positive. There are no negation particles such as nicht or kein, and that's why you use aber. Sie ist müde, aber sie kann nicht schlafen. She's tired, but she cannot sleep. Sie ist müde, aber sie kann nicht schlafen. Again, we don't have any negation particles in the first part of the sentence, so we use aber. Ich will Tennis spielen, aber ich habe keinen Schläger. I want to play tennis, but I don't have a racket. Ich will Tennis spielen, aber ich habe keinen Schläger. And here as well, we say aber because the first part is positive. Okay, and now let's check out some examples with sondern. Sie wohnen nicht in Berlin, sondern in München. They do not live in Berlin, but in Munich. Sie wohnen nicht in Berlin, sondern in München. You see that there is the negation particle nicht in the first part of the sentence, and that's why I used sondern instead of aber. Wir trinken nicht Kaffee, sondern Tee. We don't drink coffee, but tea. And here again, we have a nicht that triggers the use of sondern. Wir trinken nicht Kaffee, sondern Tee. Ich habe keine Katze, sondern einen Hund. I don't have a cat, but a dog. In this example, I use the feminine negation particle keine, and that's why we have to say sondern. Ich habe keine Katze, sondern einen Hund. To summarize, when the first part of the sentence includes a negation particle such as nicht or kein, keine, keinen, etc., and the second part of the sentence contradicts the first part, then we use sondern. In all other cases, it's aber. Aber can be translated as the usual but, and sondern as but rather. Okay, that's the difference between sondern and aber. Thanks for watching, and I see you in the next lesson. Today I'd like to talk about two mistakes that I hear every day. I'll explain why they happen and how you can avoid them. Let's jump right in. The first one is the English word our versus the German word Uhr. These are false friends because they sound familiar but have a different meaning. When I ask the question, wie lange hast du gestern Deutsch gelernt? How long did you study German yesterday? Wie lange hast du gestern Deutsch gelernt? I often get the answer 1 Uhr, because the student wants to say 1 hour. Now, the problem is that 1 Uhr doesn't mean 1 hour, but 1 o'clock. 2 Uhr is 2 o'clock, 3 Uhr 3 o'clock, and so on. The correct way of saying 1 hour is eine Stunde. Here are some more examples with the word Stunde, or in the plural, Stunden. Der Flug von Berlin nach München dauert eine Stunde. The flight from Berlin to Munich takes 1 hour. Der Flug von Berlin nach München dauert eine Stunde. Das Konzert hat vor 2 Stunden angefangen. The concert started 2 hours ago. Das Konzert hat vor 2 Stunden angefangen. Ich musste 3 Stunden warten. I had to wait for 3 hours. Ich musste 3 Stunden warten. Eine Stunde hat 60 Minuten. An hour has 60 minutes. Eine Stunde hat 60 Minuten. Ein Tag hat 24 Stunden. A day has 24 hours. Ein Tag hat 24 Stunden. Okay, so far about the difference between Stunde and Uhr. When you want to say hour, in German you use Stunde and not Uhr. The second mistake I'd like to talk about involves the word time, which means Zeit in German. Let's have a look at some sentences that include this word. Ich habe keine Zeit. I don't have time. Ich habe keine Zeit. Wir wollen keine Zeit verschwenden. We don't want to waste time. Wir wollen keine Zeit verschwenden. So far, so good. Now, what happens if I want to say, last time I saw him was a year ago? Well, according to what we just saw, it would make sense to say, letzte Zeit habe ich ihn vor einem Jahr gesehen. Last time, letzte Zeit. But unfortunately, that's wrong. In German, there is an additional word for time, and it is Mal. Das Mal. It's used when you refer to an occurrence, as in first time, next time, last time, etc. So the correct way of saying last time I saw him was a year ago is letztes Mal habe ich ihn vor einem Jahr gesehen. And here are some more examples. Nächstes Mal kaufe ich ein iPhone. Next time I'll buy an iPhone. Nächstes Mal kaufe ich ein iPhone. Mein erstes Mal in Berlin. Ich bin so aufgeregt. My first time in Berlin. I'm so excited. Mein erstes Mal in Berlin. Ich bin so aufgeregt. Okay, let's summarize. When you want to say hour, the correct word in German is Stunde. Uhr is only used in a clock, as in 2 o'clock, or when you refer to a real clock, like the clock at the wall. When expressing time as a quantity or period of time, for example, how much time do you have, or time flies by so fast, use Zeit. When expressing time as an occurrence, or how often something happens, use Mal. Alright, those were 2 very common mistakes German learners make, but now you know where they come from and how to avoid them. I'll see you back here in the next lesson. In this lesson, I'll be talking about 2 German verbs that are very common and widely used, wissen and kennen. Both translate to the English verb to know, but they are used in different situations, and as in English there is only one verb for both situations, it happens a lot that students use wissen instead of kennen, and vice versa. So, in order to avoid misunderstandings, it's necessary to know the difference between these 2 German verbs. And we'll start with wissen. You use wissen when you start a sentence with I know that, etc., such as I know that 1 + 1 is 2. You also use wissen when you have the knowledge about something, as in I know how to drive a car, or I know when he'll be back from work. These sentences are usually followed by a subordinate clause. Let's check out some examples to get a better understanding. Ich weiß, wann der Film beginnt. I know when the film starts. You have the knowledge about something, and you see that there is this question word, wann, when, after I know. That is a clear sign that you have to use wissen and not kennen. Ich weiß, wann der Film beginnt. Weißt du, wie man einen Kuchen backt? Do you know how to bake a cake? This is a question, and you ask if someone has a specific knowledge. You can also see that I used a question word, wie, how. That is an indicator for wissen. Weißt du, wie man einen Kuchen backt? Nein, ich weiß nicht, wo er wohnt. No, I don't know where he lives. The question word in this case is wo, where. Nein, ich weiß nicht, wo er wohnt. Ich weiß, dass Kolumbus Amerika entdeckt hat. I know that Columbus discovered America. This is an example for a sentence that starts with I know that, etc. Sentences like these always use wissen. Ich weiß, dass Kolumbus Amerika entdeckt hat. Hast du gewusst, dass ich in Berlin wohne? Did you know that I live in Berlin? This time it's a question, but it's the same principle. I know that, etc. equals wissen. Hast du gewusst, dass ich in Berlin wohne? Okay, this was part 1 of the lesson. I'll see you again in part 2, where we will have a closer look at the verb kennen. Hello and welcome back. Let's move on to the second German verb that means to know. Kennen. You use kennen when you'd like to express that you're familiar with someone. For example, I know your brother. And also when you're familiar with something, as in I know the bakery on Main Street. These are usually simple sentences. They can be as short as yeah, I know him. Let's have a look at some examples with kennen. Ich kenne die neue Freundin von Peter. I know Peter's new girlfriend. Or as we literally say, I know the new girlfriend of Peter. In this example, you express that you're familiar with a person. Ich kenne die neue Freundin von Peter. Kennst du die Hauptstadt von Deutschland? Do you know the capital of Germany? And you could replace do you know with are you familiar with? And that's an indicator for kennen. Kennst du die Hauptstadt von Deutschland? Ja, ich kenne sie. Yes, I know it. In German we say, I know her, because capital is a feminine noun. A short and sweet sentence, a sign for kennen. Sentences with wissen are usually much more complex. Ja, ich kenne sie. Ich kenne den Unterschied zwischen kennen und wissen. I know the difference between kennen and wissen. Basically, when you say I know something, you use kennen. Ich kenne den Unterschied zwischen kennen und wissen. Kennt ihr das Passwort für das WLAN? Do you guys know the password for the Wi-Fi? And here again, I'm asking, do you know something? And that's why I used kennen. Kennt ihr das Passwort für das WLAN? Okay, so let's summarize. You use wissen when you say something like, I know how to cook pasta. You also use wissen when there are question words in the sentence. For example, I know where the keys are. Another typical scenario for wissen is, I know that, as in, I know that an hour has 60 minutes. So that's wissen. And now some rules for the verb kennen. It is used in sentences like, I know someone, or I know something, such as, I know the difference between this and that. And finally, for your convenience and to refresh your memory, here are the conjugations of the two verbs. I know that it might be confusing, but you'll get a feeling for it, and the longer you practice and speak German, the easier it gets, and you won't have to think too much because it just sounds right. So that's it for today. Thanks for watching. Congratulations on finishing the course Perfect Your German. I'm confident that by now you're able to identify, understand, and avoid some of the most common mistakes German learners make. As always, if you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me. I wish you all the best on your ongoing language learning journey and would be happy to welcome you to one of my other courses. Auf Wiedersehen.